Leonardo da Vinci, we all know the name, right? The painter of the Mona Lisa, the guy who dreamed up flying machines, the ultimate Renaissance man. But what if the story we've always been told, the one about a divine, almost magical genius, is actually hiding a much more interesting and way more human truth? In this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers of that legend to reveal the methodical mind behind all the magic. So, the popular image we have of Leonardo is this divine genius, just struck by these incredible flashes of inspiration. But the evidence? It points to something else entirely. A methodical thinker who developed a specific, repeatable process for understanding the world. This isn't a story about magic. It's a story about a method. And Leonardo himself basically gave us the key to understanding him with this quote. He knew that to find the real truth, you have to look deeper. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Look right beneath the surface of the legend. All right, first up, the man, the myth. We're going to look beyond this idea of the universal genius, because history has pretty much canonized Leonardo as this almost superhuman figure. I mean, he's seen as the painter of mysteries, an engineer of impossible machines, a prophet who was centuries ahead of his time. It's a really powerful and romantic image, for sure. But here's the thing. Focusing only on the what, the mysterious paintings and the futuristic gadgets, totally obscures the most miraculous part of his story, the repeatable how behind his genius. So let's dig into that. Next section, Beneath the Paint, where we'll explore the science of the Mona Lisa. We're going to start with his most famous work. Just like modern science can now look beneath the actual layers of paint, we're going to peel back the layers of the myth, using the Mona Lisa as our guide. We've all heard about her enigmatic smile and that famous sfumato effect, that smoky, soft-focus quality that seems almost alive. So was this just a moment of divine inspiration, a lightning bolt from the heavens? Or was it a technical problem that he solved through sheer painstaking work? And get this, the science here is absolutely staggering. X-ray analysis reveals the secret, up to 30 layers of glaze. And each layer was less than 2 microns thick. That is thinner than a human hair. This wasn't a single stroke of genius. This was years of patient, deliberate experimentation. So the crucial point is this. Sfumato wasn't some kind of art magic. It was physics. Leonardo was literally conducting a controlled experiment in how light scatters. His paintbrush wasn't just an artist's tool, it was a scientific instrument. This was an engineering achievement every bit as much as it was an artistic one. Okay, now for nature's hidden logic and finding patterns in the world. Because this methodical approach wasn't just for painting. This was how Leonardo saw everything. He was constantly, and I mean constantly, searching for the hidden logic, the underlying patterns that connect all of nature. You see, Leonardo was denied a classical education, which meant he couldn't just rely on ancient texts like everyone else. Instead, he had to rely on direct observation and experience. He wrote that experience was his true teacher. And this thing that should have been a disadvantage, well, it became his greatest strength. And this table just illustrates his unique perspective so brilliantly. He saw that the turbulent flow of blood in an artery followed the exact same rules as eddies in a river. He understood that the curve of a bird's wing was just interacting with the flow of air. To him, anatomy, physics, and engineering weren't separate subjects in different boxes. Nope, they were all just different expressions of the same underlying system of flow, balance, and feedback. This way of seeing the world actually has a name, and to get it, we need to look at another iconic image, the Vitruvian Man, and debunk the myth that surrounds it. This brings us to the language of systems. So, the myth is that the Vitruvian Man is all about the mystical golden ratio. But if you actually read his notes, he never mentions it, not once. Instead, he uses simple, rational fractions, a quarter, a seventh. And why? Because he was creating a functional mathematics that builders and craftsmen could actually use, not some mystical diagram to be worshipped. It was about reproducible coherence, not divine perfection. And this brings us right to the core idea. What Leonardo was practicing is what we now call systems thinking. It's the vision that everything from the human body to a river to a machine is interconnected and governed by a single architecture of order, balance, and feedback. So what does this look like in practice? Well, it means thinking in cycles, not straight lines. It means working iteratively, constantly refining. It means designing things that can self-correct,
just like a bird adjusts its wings in flight. And crucially, it means seeking coherence, not absolute control. He even practiced this collaboratively in his workshop, which completely shatters the myth of the solitary genius.
But this powerful way of thinking, well, it came with a heavy burden. It forced Leonardo to confront the moral dimension of his work, raising these profound questions that are maybe more relevant today than ever before. Which brings us to a question for us: the ethics of invention. He lived with a terrible paradox. He personally called war bestial madness. And yet, to survive, he designed some of the most advanced weapons of his time for ruthless patrons. His genius was not some serene gift. It was a constant, agonisting struggle with the consequences of his own inventions. And just look at this quote from his private notebooks. It's haunting. It could have been written yesterday. He was acutely aware of the central dilemma of our technological age. Our power to create and destroy is growing far, far faster than our wisdom to use it. So when we look back, what was his greatest invention? It wasn't a tank or a flying machine. It was a mindset. A way of seeing the world not as a collection of separate objects to be controlled, but as an integrated, continuous fabric of relationships. And this really is the ultimate takeaway. The coherence he sought in art and science, it wasn't about achieving some static, perfect state. No, it was about understanding that to truly know the world, you have to participate in it, to be in a dialogue with it. Which leaves us with the same question he wrestled with 500 years ago. As our own knowledge and power accelerate at a dizzying pace, can we ensure that it remains humane? Leonardo's life doesn't give us an easy answer, but it definitely shows us the vital importance of asking the question.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking on, well, perhaps the most overused, misunderstood, and definitely awe-inspiring figure of the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah, he really is. For centuries, he's been sort of enshrined as this solitary, almost divinely gifted universal man, the prophet of engineering and art who just stood alone, way ahead of his time.
Right, that luminous myth. It's magnificent, of course, but it does kind of obscure the practical, maybe even revolutionary nature of his actual method, doesn't it?
It really does. And that's our mission today, basically. We
Yeah.
want to peer beneath that mythic surface. We're not really here just to celebrate the finished paintings, amazing as they are.
We're trying to extract his operational manual.
His way of thinking. Exactly. His methodology. How did he do it?
Okay, so let's unpack this then. We've been diving into some deep research that really repositions Leonardo, not so much a prophet gazing into the future.
No. More like the ultimate embodiment of all those Renaissance tensions. That constant, fierce, restless back and forth between, say, faith and empirical reason.
Or between designing devastating war machines and capturing profound beauty.
Precisely. And his true genius, maybe, wasn't just innate talent, but his ability to sort of manage those tensions,
Yeah.
to hold them together.
And in doing that, he pioneered something we'd now recognize, right?
Absolutely. What we now call systems thinking. For Leonardo, you see, art, science, anatomy, engineering, they were never really separate silos in his mind.
They were all reflections of, a single structure?
A single unifying architecture, yeah. An architecture of order, balance, and crucially, continuous feedback. He wasn't just looking at the individual parts in isolation.
He was studying how the parts talk to each other.
That's a great way to put it. He saw the connections.
A unified vision, then, connecting the small scale, the microcosm, to the macrocosm. And our sources, they define this lifelong obsession, this quest for unifying principles, with a specific phrase.
The anatomy of light.
Yeah, that's it.
And it's a beautiful phrase, I think, because it captures both sides, the technical, the almost nitty-gritty, but also the spiritual dimension.
So it was his relentless quest to reveal the invisible harmonies, the sort of internal logic holding the world together.
Exactly that. Whether he was looking at, I don't know, the way light diffused across a human face, or the perfect spiral of water in a river eddy, or the movement of blood through the heart.
He was looking for the structure underneath it all.
He was mapping the coherence of existence. That's what drove him.
Okay, so if we accept this premise that Leonardo was fundamentally a systems engineer, we kind of have to start with his most famous, maybe most deceptive piece of work, the Mona Lisa.
Right, because when we stand there in front of her, what we see is this incredible, soft, almost ghostly optical illusion. It feels like pure genius, almost divine.
We see the result, the surface magic.
The surface deception, yeah. But the revolution here, and this is where it gets really interesting for understanding his method, is that modern science, well, It lets us peek behind the curtain.
Using tools like X-ray fluorescence, XRF imaging.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Non-invasive tools that essentially let us peel back the centuries and peer right into the painting's layers, its strata.
And what does the method reveal? Not divine spontaneity.
Not quite. It reveals incredibly calculated precision, almost painstaking engineering.
Okay, here's where it gets really fascinating for me. You're talking about sfumato, right? That smoky, blurring technique that makes boundaries indistinct, keeps her smile so ambiguous.
That's the one.
It sounds like pure art, but the execution. You're saying it was an act of profound, almost geological engineering patience.
Near geological is a good way to think about it, yeah. To get that luminous, soft quality, he wasn't just, blending wet paint on the surface like other artists might.
So what was he doing?
The analysis shows he applied layer after layer of translucent varnish, maybe between 20 and 30 layers.
20 to 30, that's a lot.
It is. And this process likely wasn't finished in a year or two. It probably spanned years, maybe even decades, of slow, careful work, which tells you something about his patience as an experimenter.
Okay, 20 or 30 layers, that sounds painstaking. But let's talk dimensions. How thin are we talking?
Incredibly thin. The microanalysis shows that each layer was consistently less than 2 microns thick.
2 microns, what's that in context?
Well, a human hair is roughly 75 microns thick. So these are layers applied with a patience that, frankly, borders on the obsessive-compulsive.
But it wasn't obsessive for obsession's sake, it was functional.
Purely functional. And this is where it really elevates from just careful painting to actual engineering. It's about the material science.
Okay, how so? What did the XRF imaging find in those layers?
This is the kicker. When scientists analyzed these glaze layers, they found they contain almost no actual colored pigment. Barely any.
Wait, so what were they made of?
Mostly binder, a highly refined oil resin emulsion. He wasn't just controlling color. He was meticulously controlling the way light itself passed through and reflected off these near-transparent layers.
Ah, okay. So this wasn't just about how it looked right then, but about the structure, the physical integrity, the endurance of the painting itself.
Absolutely. That's the engineering insight. The choice of that specific binder, that emulsion, provided elasticity. And that elasticity is the key to the Mona Lisa's survival over half a millennium.
How does elasticity help a painting survive?
Well, think about it. Renaissance paintings were typically done on wooden panels. And wood? It moves. It expands and contracts quite drastically with changes in temperature and humidity.
Right, like floorboards creaking.
Exactly. Now, the surfaces of many other masterpieces from that time, they relied on less flexible early oil mixtures, or maybe egg tempera. Over time, those surfaces became brittle. They cracked. It's called craquelure. You see it everywhere.
But not so much on the Mona Lisa.
Much less. Leonardo's engineered paint film, those multiple elastic layers, allowed the surface to flex subtly, almost imperceptibly, with the wood underneath. It absorbed centuries of thermal stress, micro-movement.
So he literally engineered the longevity of the object, not just the illusion of the figure.
Precisely.
Okay.
It completely reframes the work, doesn't it? We're not just looking at a portrait. We're looking at a sophisticated system of optics and material science.
It's an optical equation and a controlled experiment in preservation.
It really is. The whole painting is designed to manipulate light absorption and reflection. By layering 20-30 near-transparent films, he could create light diffusion so subtle that it mimics the way light interacts with atmosphere or fog or even just distance.
Which creates that famous ambiguity, the smile that seems to shift.
It's a living demonstration of physics.
Yeah.
That ambiguity isn't just an artistic trick. It's built into the materials, micron by micron.
So by engineering this physical relationship, light, material, surface, Leonardo essentially dissolved the boundary between the painting and us, the perceiver.
Yes. The viewer's gaze, your movement, the light source in the room, it all completes the optical circuit he designed.
Her smile becomes the ultimate feedback mechanism.
Exactly. She doesn't have a fixed expression. Her expression is born in that dynamic relationship between the light hitting those layers and your perception. That complexity is engineered right in.
Okay, that calculated foundation, the reliance on empirical, slow, really patient observation, it takes us naturally to his background, doesn't it? He wasn't part of the Florentine academic elite.
Not at all. Being an illegitimate son was a huge barrier socially, but also educationally. It meant he was formally denied the classical Latin education that the privileged class received.
An education based heavily on ancient texts written in Latin.
Right. Texts like Galen on medicine, Aristotle on physics, the established canon. His exclusion from that orthodox academic world was arguably his greatest advantage.
Because he couldn't just rely on the
He
books.
couldn't easily access them, or at least not in the way university-trained scholars could. So his education had to come directly from the source.
Hmm.
Observation, experience. He famously wrote, "Experience is the mistress of those who have written well."
Radical empiricism born of necessity.
Pretty much. He had no other option. He learned from riverbanks, from watching the structure of shadows change, from the flight patterns of birds.
It sounds like he saw the entire world as his textbook.
I think he did. And this learning style, this reliance on direct experience, it was really cemented during his apprenticeship in Florence.
Under Andrea del Verrocchio.
Right. And Verrocchio's studio.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just an art school. It was more like a massive interdisciplinary research laboratory, a sort of Renaissance makerspace.
What specifically was going on there that fostered this the systems view you're talking about?
Well, it was this incredible alchemy of practical trades, all happening under one roof. They were mastering metallurgy, casting huge bronze statues like the David. At the same time, they were grinding pigments for paint, studying optics for lens design.
And building machines.
Oh, absolutely. Designing massive scaffolding and machinery for public works, like hoisting the copper ball onto Florence Cathedral's dome. This fusion of trades, metallurgy, mechanics, art, optics, anatomy, even it gave Leonardo this unique vocabulary.
The ability to connect seemingly disparate fields.
Yes, he learned to speak the language of mechanics, whether he was describing how a fountain worked or how a muscle contracted. It was all about forces and structures to him.
And his ultimate focus, perhaps, for applying this interdisciplinary language became the human body itself.
Yes, his anatomical studies. We know he conducted extensive, truly radical studies. There are about 240 surviving pages of these incredible anatomical drawings.
And this was dangerous work, wasn't it? Often performed in secret.
Hugely dangerous. It was in direct violation of ecclesiastical law against desecrating the dead. Dissecting human bodies was largely forbidden.
Socially and legally risky. But for him, it wasn't about rebellion or sacrilege.
All the evidence suggests not. For Leonardo, it seems to have been an act of extreme reverence. He didn't see the body as just this forbidden, decaying vessel. He saw it as, and this is a key idea, a living geometry of the divine.
A living geometry. So he wasn't just sketching what he saw.
No, he was searching for the underlying mathematical and mechanical principles. The metaphysical equations, if you like, that governed life itself. He was trying to prove, through direct measurement and observation, that creation was coherent, that it made sense.
And his empirical hands-on observation led him to actually correct anatomical dogma that had stood unchallenged for, what, over 1,000 years?
Absolutely. The most famous example probably involves the ancient Roman physician, Galen. Galenic medicine was the undisputed authority.
And Galen got some things wrong about the heart, didn't he?
Quite fundamentally wrong, yes. Galen incorrectly believed that blood was generated in the liver and then sort of consumed by the tissues. And crucially, he thought the interventricular septum, the wall between the heart's main chambers, had tiny invisible pores, allowing blood to pass directly through from right to left.
Which is completely wrong, but it was dogma for centuries. How did Leonardo figure this out without modern tools?
Through incredibly innovative empirical methods. For instance, to understand the precise shape and function of the heart's chambers and valves, he used wax casting.
Wax casting. How?
He would pour molten wax into the chambers of a deceased heart, let it harden, and then dissolve away the heart tissue, leaving a perfect three-dimensional model of the internal voids and the valves.
Wow, that's ingenious.
It allowed him, through careful observation of these casts and actual dissections, to accurately describe the function of the aortic valve, for example, and grasp key aspects of blood circulation. He corrected Galen's errors about the heart's valves centuries before William Harvey published his definitive work on circulation in the 1600s.
That detail, using wax casts to map the unseen structure, is fantastic. But the real seed of the system's mind, as you mentioned earlier, wasn't just the accuracy, was it? It was the power of analogy.
Yes, this is crucial. He connected the internal body to the external world through functional analogy. He saw the structure of the body operating on the same mechanical principles as the structure of nature or machines.
So the heart wasn't just an organ, it was
A hydraulic pump, a sophisticated mechanical device for circulating fluid, following laws of fluid dynamics he observed in rivers.
and the lungs.
Bellows. Veins weren't just tubes, they were like rivers and channels. Their flow rates governed by principles he could chart and measure. Muscles were like cables and levers, providing tensile strength and leverage according to mechanical laws.
The eye as a lens.
A camera obscura, a specialized lens following optical principles. The body wasn't just passive matter for him. It was a system of force, motion, and balance.
And this intensive pattern recognition, seeing the same principles at work everywhere.
It led to that singular worldview we keep coming back to. The flow of blood in the veins mirrored the vortex patterns he sketched obsessively in flowing water. The mechanical structure of a bone, how it handles stress, mirrored the architectural supports he designed for a building.
He started perceiving the world as this dynamic, interconnected system governed by the same fundamental laws across all scales.
Exactly. That unity of analogy, seeing the pump in the heart and the river in the vein, that was the breakthrough. That was the system's mind emerging.
Okay, so moving from the internal mechanics of the body to the external mechanics of the world, his engineering notebooks are just incredible, aren't they? Filled with thousands of sketches, pulleys, flywheels, gears, wings, water vortices.
Thousands upon thousands. And they're all driven by this singular obsession, understanding motion, forces, and how systems maintain equilibrium, how things stay balanced while moving.
And for Leonardo, equilibrium wasn't a static thing, was it? Not just sitting still.
No, definitely not. It was an active process. He understood, maybe intuitively at first, then more explicitly, that anything in motion, water, air, a bird, a machine, requires continuous reciprocal adjustment to sustain its path, its trajectory. It needs feedback.
And this quest for dynamic stability, for active balance, it's maybe most visible in his work on flight, his aeronautical study.
Oh, absolutely. The Codex on the Flight of Birds, which dates from around 1505, is just a masterpiece of empirical observation and mechanical insight.
What was the big breakthrough there? Not just dreaming of a flying machine, surely. People had done that.
No, it was his deep understanding of the forces acting on a flying body. Specifically, he was the first person we know of to explicitly articulate and distinguish between a body's center of gravity, its cog, and its center of pressure, the cop.
Okay, those terms COP, they're fundamental in modern aerospace engineering. Why was making that distinction so radical back in 1505?
Because it completely changed how you'd even think about designing something to fly. The center of gravity, that's basically the point where the object's weight is concentrated.
Right.
The center of pressure is the point where the aerodynamic lift force is effectively concentrated. Now, for a body to fly stably, these 2 points have to be precisely balanced relative to each other.
What happens if they're not?
If they're too far apart or in the wrong relationship, the body will pitch up or die down uncontrollably. It becomes unstable. Leonardo realized stability wasn't automatic. It wasn't a fixed state. It was a process requiring continuous, tiny adjustments.
Feedback.
Constant feedback. As he put it, the flying object, the bird, must essentially teach itself how to fly by constantly sensing and correcting.
So the bird isn't just flapping. It's constantly receiving information about air pressure and its own position, and then self-correcting.
It's a continuous reciprocal feedback loop. And he tried to translate this concept directly into his machinery designs. His most famous inventions, even the ones that never got built, are like mechanical rehearsals of autonomy and feedback.
Okay, let's look at some specific examples. Where do we see this feedback principle really clearly in his hardware designs?
Well, take his famous designs for a self-moving cart, often called Leonardo's robot or automobile. It used coiled springs, like in a clockwork mechanism, to store energy.
Like a wind-up toy.
Sort of, but much more sophisticated. It wasn't just about releasing the energy. It used complex systems of gear differentials, not only to store and release the energy, but also to govern the speed and potentially the direction of that release. It could, in theory, correct for small mechanical errors or imbalances.
So the machine itself provided feedback to its own energy source, determining how the power was distributed.
That was the idea. A rudimentary form of programmable motion governed by internal mechanics.
And that idea of converting one type of motion into another, like rotational power into linear power, that seems central too.
Absolutely. Think about his designs for a hydraulic saw. It's designed to take the continuous circular motion of a water wheel,
The input power.
and translate it into the reciprocating motion, the back and forth sawing action of the blade. That conversion, translating continuous input into controlled oscillating output, is a fundamental engineering principle. You see it in pistons and engines even today. It's a system designed to manage energy conversion efficiently.
Even in some of his, let's say, quirkier designs, like the giant trumpet.
Yeah, the claviviola or that giant crossbow, or even theatrical machines. Take the trumpet example. A mechanism using levers and gears to extend a musician's reach, perhaps for dramatic effect in a performance. What's he doing there?
He's applying mechanics.
He's taking the anatomy of the human hand and arm, transforming its limitations by creating a mechanical system, and then translating that mechanical system back into an enhanced anatomical function, playing a bigger instrument, producing a bigger sound. Feedback as form, again and again.
But this is the point, isn't it, where this brilliant systems thinking, this power to create functional machines, runs headlong into a profound ethical challenge.
Exactly, the moral dilemma of invention itself.
The genius of creation being inseparable, potentially, from the ability to destroy. And he wasn't just designing theoretical machines, he was designing for some of the most ruthless warlords of his era.
He was. He openly denounced war in his writings as patia bestialissima, most bestial madness. He wrote that it was the work of furious beasts. Yet for his own survival, for patronage, for livelihood, he served as a military engineer for tyrants like Ludovico Sforza in Milan and, notoriously, Cesare Borgia.
So the same man mapping the exquisite divine geometry of the human heart
Was simultaneously designing massive, armored fighting vehicles that look like precursors to tanks, innovative cannons, siege engines, even potentially underwater breathing apparatus for sinking enemy ships.
It's the ultimate contradiction of the Renaissance ideal, perhaps.
The beautiful unity of analogy, the idea that the same principles governed rivers and blood flow that broke down under the stress of human pathology, of war. The same precision he achieved in designing an irrigation canal to bring life-giving water.
Was equally applicable, equally lethal when applied to designing a fortress siege weapon.
Exactly. And that's why his lament, found in the margins of the Codex Atlanticus, is so incredibly powerful and resonates so much today. He wrote, "The knowledge of how to destroy has outpaced the knowledge of why we live."
Wow. That line, written half a millennium ago, it could have been written yesterday about AI or genetic engineering.
It could.
Yeah.
He recognized right there the systemic failure, the risk that human morality, our understanding of purpose, couldn't keep pace with our exploding technological power.
He saw that systems, mechanical, biological, social, are not inherently good or bad.
They're reflections of the input. They optimize for the goals they're given. And if the input is human aggression, tribalism, the lust for domination, then the output will be optimized destruction.
So his genius was maybe ethical precisely because he was forced by his own patrons, his own work, to confront the perverse, destructive uses of his own scientific and engineering power.
I think that's a very insightful way to put it. He couldn't ignore the dark side because he was helping to build it. #5, geometry, ethics, and humanizing proportion.
That exploration of order, balance, and the underlying principles brings us, I think, inevitably to maybe his most famous drawing, the Vitruvian Man.
Ah, yes. The man in the circle and the square.
It's become this ultimate icon of human proportion, perfect geometry, and it's often cited, isn't it, as proof of his deep, almost mystical devotion to the golden ratio, Phi.
It is often cited that way, yes. And this is perhaps one of the most persistent, popular myths we really need to dismantle if we want to understand his actual method.
So he wasn't obsessed with Phi.
While the drawing itself is undeniably beautiful and resonant, if you actually read Leonardo's accompanying notes, the text written around the drawing, he does not mention the golden ratio, or phi, even once.
Not at all.
Not at all. That whole idea, associating Leonardo heavily with phi, really only entered popular culture and art history much, much later. It's more of a modern projection onto him.
Okay, so if he wasn't writing about the mystical golden ratio, what was he actually writing about in those notes? What proportions was he using?
He listed simple, functional, rational fractions, proportions that could be easily understood and, crucially, utilized by any architect, stonemason, tailor, or craftsman of the time.
Like what kind of fractions?
Things like the distance from the chin to the top of the head is 1/8 of the total height. The length of the foot is 1/7 of the height. The width of the chest is 1/4 of the height. Simple, whole number ratios.
Okay, wait. If he was using simple, rational fractions that any craftsman could actually measure and apply, then his primary intention wasn't some esoteric, mystical mathematics. It was practical.
Exactly. It was about practicality and reproducibility. His geometry here wasn't a mystical symmetry rooted in irrational numbers like phi. It was more like what we might call an empirical theology.
Empirical theology, meaning?
Meaning he was using simple, observable numbers and ratios to seek reproducible coherence in the human form. He saw beauty not in some hidden, almost magical number, but in the functional, measurable reconciliation of the parts, how the length of the hand relates to the length of the foot, or how the wingspan mirrors the height. Functionality.
This actually makes the Vitruvian Man seem far more revolutionary in a way. It's not about worshiping a secret number, it's a kind of democratization of knowledge about proportion.
I think so too. It functions almost as a manual of participation. It instructs the viewer, the potential craftsman, on how the human body fits within and relates to the basic geometry it measures.
So the circle and the square aren't just abstract symbols of heaven and earth.
They're more like functional diagrams. They show continuous transformation and feedback, how the measurements shift and relate to one another as the figure changes posture slightly, from standing straight to spread-eagled. The system isn't just the figure, it's the dynamic relationship between the figure and the geometric forms that contain and measure it.
This intense focus on relationship, on coherence, on how things fit together functionally. It seems crucial when we look at Leonardo's personal life, too, which was often lived, as we know, on the periphery of conventional society.
He was an outsider in many significant ways.
And you think that liminality, that outsider status, sharpened his perception?
I think is very likely.
Yeah.
As an illegitimate child, he lacked the full legal standing and social integration of the Florentine elite. This status perhaps forced him into a role of keen observer, someone always looking in from the edge, maybe noticing patterns and connections that insiders, comfortable within the system, might miss.
And his vulnerability, his difference, was exposed very explicitly and dangerously in 1476, wasn't it? With the accusation of sodomy in Florence.
Yes, that anonymous accusation, lodged against him and several other young men associated with the artistic circles, put his life and career in serious peril. Homosexual acts were capital offenses. The prosecution was inconsistent.
And even though the charges were eventually dismissed, apparently due to lack of assigned accuser or corroborating evidence, the incident must have been terrifying.
Undoubtedly. And it starkly exposed the profound double life of Florentine society at the time, a culture that, on the one hand, celebrated idealized male beauty in its art and Neoplatonic philosophy, yet on the other hand, strictly criminalized same-sex relationships.
Our sources suggest that after this ordeal, there's a noticeable silence, or at least extreme discretion, regarding sexuality in his personal writings.
That seems true. But while direct references vanish, the visible evidence of deep, enduring affection for his male companions, particularly his long-term apprentice and companion Salai, and later his principal assistant and heir, Francesco Melzi, is undeniable. These relationships spanned decades.
So how does this connect back to his art and his systems thinking? Is there a link?
This is where we move into interpretation, of course, but many scholars suggest there is. They propose that the recurring presence of androgynous figures, the beautiful, slightly ambiguous saints like John the Baptist, the gently smiling, almost enigmatic angels that populate his later work, they might be more than just aesthetic choices derived from his masters.
You mean they could be subtle acts of reconciliation?
Possibly. Acts of visual reconciliation, a way of creating a system of visual harmony within the painting that could integrate aspects of perhaps forbidden love or unconventional relationships with accepted sacred representation.
So art became the domain where he could visually unify the contradictions that society or the law denied him in life.
It's a compelling idea. That he constructed his own ethical system of coherence right there on the panel, demonstrating visually that beauty and perhaps even divinity could be found precisely where opposites male and female, sacred and profane, acceptable and forbidden, seem to meet and reconcile. #V, the workshop as a distributed mind.
Okay, so we've moved from the myth of the solitary genius to the reality of the methodical engineer. Now we need to tackle another aspect of that solitary myth, the idea of him working alone in some high tower.
Right, the isolated creator. But the reality of his creative process, especially during his most productive periods in Milan and later Florence, was intensely collaborative.
The workshop.
The workshop was absolutely central. It was the crucible where his systems thinking was put into practice daily. It wasn't just a studio, it was an ecosystem, a kind of living circuit.
Composed of
Apprentices, skilled assistants, engineers, copyists, collaborators, people like Giovanni Antonio Beltrafio, Andrea Salai, and most importantly in later years, Francesco Melzi, who became like a surrogate son and would eventually inherit and try to organize his vast, chaotic collection of papers.
So this wasn't just Leonardo teaching pupils, it was more like distributed cognition.
That's a perfect term for it. The genius wasn't just located inside Leonardo's head. It was activated and amplified by the interactions, the feedback loops within the entire workshop system.
Meaning the genius was partly in the system he established for generating, testing, and refining ideas.
Absolutely. And this collaborative aspect isn't just speculation. It's increasingly confirmed by modern scientific analysis of the paintings themselves.
How so? What does science show?
Techniques like X-ray imaging, infrared reflectography, and detailed pigment analysis of major works. Think of the two versions of the Virgin of the Rocks, or even parts of the Last Supper before its decay. They reveal significant variations.
Variations in what?
In things like the underdrawing, the preparatory layers, the priming, even the final brushwork in certain areas like drapery, backgrounds, or secondary figures, they show the distinct hands of multiple skilled artists working on the same piece under Leonardo's direction.
So collaboration didn't dilute his authorship in his view. It actually expanded it.
It seems so. It created a much larger processing capacity. He was essentially orchestrating a human feedback loop, an algorithm of vision, you could almost say.
His role wasn't necessarily to execute every square inch himself.
No. His primary role seems to have been to establish the conceptual framework, articulate the core principles, often through sketches and instructions, design the overall composition and key figures, solve the difficult problems, and then effectively manage this collective mind to bring the vision to completion.
It sounds a bit like an early version of an open source model in software development.
That's a really interesting analogy. Concepts were perhaps iterated somewhat publicly within the workshop, improved collectively through discussion and trial, and credit or authorship seems to have been fluid, reflected in the shared execution, rather than a single signature.
And this workshop structure, this collaborative hub, it seems vital for allowing that cross-pollination of disciplines we talked about earlier.
Definitely. It allowed anatomy to sit right next to architecture, hydraulics to inform portraiture. This fusion could flourish outside the more rigid constraints of the traditional Florentine guilds or purely academic settings.
The workshop was his sanctuary from conformity.
In many ways, yes. It was the space where he could bring all the pieces together. If he needed to understand the tensile strength of rope for designing a crane, he likely had access to engineers or builders within his circle. If he needed precise human proportion for painting an apostle, he drew on his anatomical work, perhaps discussed with assistants.
He integrated all these functions into a single, dynamic, creative feedback loop.
Demonstrating, again, that intelligence, for him, seemed to be a state of relationship, of connection, not an isolation chamber.
It sounds like maybe one of his greatest, least recognized contributions to the Renaissance was simply the invention of the modern interdisciplinary design studio or research lab.
You can make a very strong argument for that. He modeled the idea that the most complex, interesting problems are often best solved by combining diverse expertise, iterating constantly, and allowing specialized knowledge to circulate freely and cross-fertilize among collaborators.
Okay, so if we pull back and look at the whole picture, if we accept that all these surviving traces, the paintings, the machine designs, the thousands of pages of notebooks covering everything imaginable, if they all form one continuous lifelong inquiry,
Then you start to see that living algorithm, as you called it, running constantly beneath the surface.
and what is the fundamental architecture of that algorithm? What's the recurring pattern of thought that unites all these incredibly diverse projects?
I think, at its core, it is the relentless search for equilibrium within complexity. His method was inherently responsive, adaptive, recursive.
How do we see that in the notebooks?
You see the loop constantly.
Hmm.
Observation leads to a question or a hypothesis that leads to a design or an experiment. The result of the design or experiment leads to correction, refinement, which then circles back to deeper, more informed observation. It's a continuous cycle of learning and adjustment.
He understood that existence, whether biological or mechanical or even artistic, is dynamic. It's sustained by constant rebalancing.
Yes, long before the formal terms cybernetics or systems theory ever existed, he grasped this intuitively and empirically. Stability isn't static, it's actively maintained.
Where do we see this search for equilibrium physically or conceptually in his work? Give us some examples.
Oh, it's everywhere once you look for it. It's in the Vitruvian Man's perfectly balanced measurements, reconciling the circle and the square. It's in his studies of bird flight, the wings' continuous tiny corrections to counteract air instability.
And the machines.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In the hydraulic pump designed to ensure equal pressure and flow. And the gear systems meant to regulate energy release. Even in the Mona Lisa, that subtle balancing act of light, creating an equilibrium between presence and absence, between sharp focus and soft diffusion, between the figure's inner life and the external world.
He was always mapping the relationships that keep a system whole, functional, stable.
That seems to be the goal. And what's fascinating, maybe even radical for his time, was his underlying belief about how that coherence is achieved.
Which was?
It seems to be achieved through communion, not control, through participation, not domination.
Unpack that a bit. How did that differ from the prevailing view?
Well, in an era that was often obsessed with human dominion over nature, trying to subdue it through religious dogma or exploit it through brute force, Leonardo constantly sketched and wrote about reciprocity, interdependence.
He believed that understanding the world wasn't about possessing it, but participating in it.
Exactly. He sought to know how the parts of existence sustain each other, how the river shapes the bank, but the bank also guides the river's flow, and that dynamic interaction sustains the ecosystem. That's the seed of modern ecological thinking right there.
And there's a profound, almost tragic irony, isn't there, that underlines this whole systems approach when we look at the fate and modern management of his greatest fresco, The Last Supper.
Oh, it's the perfect, heartbreaking metaphor for his entire project in a way.
Because he experimented with the materials.
Yes. Famously, he chose not to use the traditional, durable, true fresco technique, painting on wet plaster. Instead, he experimented with oil and tempera paints applied to a dry plaster wall, possibly over a sealed ground layer. It was a fundamentally unstable system from a material science perspective.
And the result.
The fresco began to decay almost immediately, within his own lifetime. Its survival today, in its fragile state, depends entirely on a highly sophisticated technological feedback system.
How does that work?
It lives in a specially designed, air-locked, climate-controlled environment. Dozens of microclimate sensors constantly monitor temperature, humidity, air pressure, pollutants, feeding data back to systems that make continuous adjustments to maintain a precise equilibrium.
So the painting itself has become a living organism, in a sense, maintained only by constant technological feedback loops.
Exactly. The very principles of feedback and dynamic equilibrium that he studied in nature are now being used technologically to preserve his own decaying masterpiece.
And those modern technologies we use to understand his work, the spectral imaging, the X-rays probing the layers beneath the paint.
They are, in a very real sense, the direct descendants of his own method. We are continuing his quest for understanding by probing the hidden strata, the underlying structures of the reality he created, using tools he could only dream of. He taught us that the truth of a thing often lies in its composition, layer by layer.
Yet for all his incredible precision, his empirical rigor, his dissection of mechanics, he never seemed to reduce the wonder of it all to just a mechanism, did he?
No, and that's perhaps the most crucial balance he maintained. That delicate equilibrium between intense curiosity and profound reverence. That's the heart of the humane system he pioneered.
He dissected the human body meticulously.
But seemingly only to find the source of the spirit, the anima, that animated it. He measured the Earth's features with geological precision, but still referred to the Earth poetically as the body of God. He mapped the physics of light, but clearly saw in its diffusion the tenderness and mystery of creation.
His ultimate genius, then, lay in perceiving reality not as separate objects, but as a continuous, dynamically sustained fabric of relationship. #outro. So this deep dive really shows us, I think, that Leonardo's most lasting invention wasn't the tank or the parachute or any single machine. It was a way of seeing, a comprehensive methodology for perceiving the world as interconnected, as whole.
His approach teaches us, maybe more urgently now than ever, that intelligence isn't about isolation or domination. It's fundamentally about dialogue. Dialogue between disciplines, between observation and theory, between humanity and the natural world.
And that perspective, looking at his life and work, it poses a profoundly relevant question for us right now, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Because here we are designing algorithms that learn autonomously, machines that can see and interpret the world, vast complex systems that run our societies, our economies, our information flow.
We've certainly outpaced the sheer mechanical genius of his era in terms of power and scale.
Oh, vastly.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to that fundamental question, derived from his own contradictory life. The brilliant designer of both flying machines or instruments of terror.
Which is?
As we continue to design, build, and deploy these incredibly powerful, self-adapting systems, can knowledge remain humane? Can our technological power stay connected to a sense of purpose, of reverence, of ethical balance?
It's the question he seemed to grapple with.
And perhaps his answer, or at least his approach, remains visible in every notebook entry and every subtly painted smile. Truth, for Leonardo, wasn't a fixed point to be captured and possessed. It was a process of continual rebalancing.
The luminous conversation.
The luminous conversation between what is seen, what is hidden, and what passionately seeks to see and understand his place within the whole. That dynamic, questioning, connecting method, that's the true inheritance that survives him.